Are we on?
Yep.
We're
All
on.
right. Hello, everybody.
Hello. I'm Jen McMenemy. I'm one half of Ancient History Fangirl.
And I'm Jenny Williamson, and I'm the other half of Ancient History Fangirl. Hi.
It's really weird. I can't see anyone because my screen has the PowerPoint on it. So I'm just assuming there's people there. And hello.
You look adorable, Jen. I can see you. Hi.
Thank you. All right, let's not banter too much. They didn't come here just to hear for the banter. So today we're going to talk to you about one of our favorite Greek Roman gods, Dionysus, who is the hidden voice of revolution.
Yeah.
So Jenny, what do you think of when you think about Dionysus?
Well, I think before we did this, we did all this research into Dionysus. I think what I thought of was pretty much what's on this PowerPoint presentation right now. Like, I definitely thought he was, all about the booze, all about the parties, all about the theater. Maybe there were some orgies involved. I don't know. This is what came to mind.
Definitely some orgies.
Uh-huh.
His Roman name was Bacchus, and you sort of think of him as surrounded by maenads and satyrs, and all of them letting their hair down and having an epic bacchanal in the woods. And that's kind of how he's come down to us as the Greek and Roman god of, a really good time.
Yeah, but if Dionysus was just the god of drunkenness and wild parties, then why did so many people who rebelled against Rome take him as their patron god? People like Mithridates of Pontus, Spartacus, Mark Antony, and Salvius, who was the ringleader of the Second Servile War. So in this presentation, that's what we're going to talk about.
So to do that, first we have to take a look back into the mythology of Dionysus. There are a number of stories about how Dionysus came into being. Dionysus was the son of a mortal woman named Semele and Zeus, the king of the gods. And Hera, Zeus's wife, did not like that her husband was cheating on her with a mortal woman. And let's be honest, it's Zeus. If the sun is shining, he's cheating on you. Also, if it's raining, he's cheating. Look, if he's awake, he's cheating on you.
If there's weather of any kind, he's cheating on you.
His eyes are open. Maybe if they're closed, we don't know. Anyway, there are lots and lots of iterations of this story, and what we're telling you right now is really simplified, but you need the background for where we're going. So if you know a different version, your version isn't wrong. This is the narrative we're taking. So first, Hera tricked Zeus. Hera tricked Semele into demanding that Zeus reveal himself to her in all his godly glory, which naturally made Semele just burst into flames, as you do. But just before Semele went up in smoke, Zeus performed an emergency C-section and removed his son Dionysus, who wasn't quite done gestating, and reimplanted him into his thigh or testicle, because sometimes the word that we think of as thigh means testicle. We're going with testicle.
He's definitely testicles. So Dionysus did not come out of Zeus's thigh, shall we say, looking like a normal baby. He was crowned with serpents. He had horns. He could change shape. He was a shapeshifter. And let's just say he did not blend in. And from the moment Dionysus was born out of Zeus's thigh, Hera decided she was going to make his life a living hell.
So Hera had a record of harassing Zeus's other out-of-wedlock kids too, people like Heracles, and there are many others, too many to list. And to say she had it out for Dionysus is a bit of an understatement. And when Zeus realized this, he thought it was better to just spirit his son away to the safety of Mount Nyssa, where he entrusted the care of his little boy to a satyr who was perpetually drunk and could sometimes tell the future, named Silenus, and some nymphs. And by spirited away, we mean that he got someone else to spirit his child away. Zeus doesn't do any heavy lifting. Dionysus had a great time growing up with Silenus and his satyr friends and his nymph friends. And while he was there, he learned how to cultivate wine, which would pour from the ground whenever he struck a rock. That's really, Jenny, that is such a cool party trick that I feel like I've seen somewhere before in a modern religion.
Christianity.
Oh.
Just had something in my throat. So eventually Hera discovered where Dionysus was hiding on Mount Nyssa. And so Zeus moved him again, this time to his Aunt Ino's place. And while he was hiding there, Dionysus was disguised as a girl. And unlike your typical ultra-masculine ancient Greek hero, Dionysus was not bothered by this at all. He did not feel emasculated. He liked, being feminine as well as masculine. He did not mind dressing up as a girl at all. So that's what Dionysus was up to for a while, but eventually Hera found him again, and this time she cursed Aunt Ino and her husband with a madness so severe that they tore their own son to pieces, which that kind of death comes up again and again in Dionysus mythology. Dionysus had to flee, and now he was homeless and on the run, staying one step ahead of Hera as he traveled the world.
So, in this very simplified telling of Dionysus' early life, we see some important qualities start to appear. Number one, he shapeshifts. Number two, he cultivates wine. Number three, he's gender fluid. Number four, he's associated with both madness and prophecy, which become really important in his worship later on. And number five, he's friends with satyrs and nymphs and sort of the lower rung of immortal beings. Dionysus wasn't a normal demigod. He had the powers of a full-on god, but the inhabitants of Mount Olympus, the home of the other gods, did not want to accept him. If they accepted Dionysus, then they had to let in all of Zeus's other children that were born from mortal women, and that's going to be very, very crowded.
They did not want to do that. So Dionysus embarked on a quest. Stay ahead of Hera's vengeance while convincing the humans that he met that he was a god and getting them to worship him. Because the thinking goes, if enough people worshipped him as a god, the rest of the gods would have to let him into Mount Olympus and Hera would have to leave him alone. Right? Right? You'd think.
Sensible.
You would think. But the path was not easy. People did not accept Dionysus right away. He traveled from place to place, and there are a whole lot of stories of people refusing to accept Dionysus into their hearts and minds, and Dionysus cursing them with madness and other calamities as a result. So things didn't come easily to Dionysus. He was an underdog. He was a god who suffered. He attracted a following of maenads and satyrs and amazons and war elephants and various other oddballs and misfits and weirdos. And he was just as happy hanging out with his satyr friends and other friends and drinking and lounging around in women's clothes as he was doing anything else. So
this really feels familiar, like another modern religion.
Jesus. So I keep doing that. What is that?
You really got something in your throat.
I know.
Dionysus, in addition to these comparisons we're drawing, was also a destabilizing force in mythology. Dionysus would rock up into your town, and he would fully expect you to drop everything and worship him. And if you didn't, bad things would happen to you. You might be torn limb from limb by a crowd of maenads or local women, or you might be cursed with madness and inadvertently murder your whole family and then have sex with your mom just for good measure, because why not if you're going to just go all out there, right? So not even the highest ranked members of society were immune. This regularly happened to royalty. And I would say like the most spectacular consequences happened to royalty. Dionysus didn't give a shit what your title was. When he came into town, he wanted your worship. Sorry for the swear. Perhaps for these reasons, so many marginalized people in Rome, the enslaved, women, foreigners, immigrants, identified with him.
So how was Dionysus worshipped? Dionysus is frequently referenced as a foreign god in Greek mythology, but he actually may be one of the oldest gods, if not the oldest god in the Greek pantheon. Mentions of him can be found in Linear B, which is the oldest form of Greek writing, that date from around 1250 BC on tablets which were found on the island of Crete. These writings are very fragmentary, but they suggest an association with women and wine that goes all the way back to that time.
So the great city Dionysia was perhaps the largest festival to Dionysus, definitely the largest festival in Greece. Mm-hmm. It took place in ancient Athens during the month of March. And it's hard to pinpoint the exact date when this festival began. The oldest mention we have of it occurring is around the 6th century BC, when the festival was refounded. So since this was a refounding, it's clear that the festival had existed in some format before this and maybe died out, but we don't know how long ago that was. So the great city Dionysia was a festival dedicated to all of the best things: drinking games, dancing, live theater, dancing on oiled wineskins, drinking games, orgies, and it was drinking. And it was a communal fest, recreational drugs, I assume, and it was a huge communal festival that took place over the whole city. It was also a fertility festival, which makes sense when you think about the timing of it, and involved processions featuring large penis-shaped objects called phalloi. The festival would start with a massive procession dedicated to Dionysus that began just outside of the city of Athens. This was meant to commemorate the god's original arrival into Athens. An image of Dionysus would be taken through the streets and carried up to the Theater of Dionysus on the south side of the Acropolis.
So the Theater of Dionysus, here is a picture of it. It's still there in Athens. It was and still is a huge amphitheater. You can buy tickets for 30 euros, and I really want to do that someday.
One day.
If
we ever leave quarantine.
Yeah, that never happens. So the seats in this amphitheater would originally have been made of wood with marble seats at the front, which were reserved for the best men, which were the leading men of society. But aside from those seats, men and women sat together. And this was a rare time in ancient Greek society where men and women were allowed to mingle. This was not common. At the end of the procession, it was time for animal sacrifices. There were 300 bulls ritually sacrificed to Dionysus, and that would have been enough food to feed about 70,000 people.
So before we talk about the plays that were performed during this festival, I wanted to take a little sidebar into the history of Greek tragedy and the goat song, and also because I wanted to show you this image. How amazing is this?
I kind of love it. Where did you find this picture? I don't know.
I mean, I Googled goat song, and this is what came up. Anyway, at its earliest...
There's photos for everything out there.
It really is. So at its earliest inception, a song or hymn was performed as a goat was sacrificed to Dionysus. And this song addressed various social conflicts that the community was experiencing, an airing of the grievances, if you will. The goat song evolved as time went on into a more complex performance that involved a chorus, a monologue, and eventually dialogues. This was the direct precursor to Greek drama and tragedy. The word tragedia in Greek, which is where we get the word tragedy from, which is where the word tragedy comes from. And this word actually means the song of a male goat.
So the great Greek tragedians, such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, all the big names, were writing and directing plays during the height of the great city Dionysia, and their plays were often acts of protest theater, commenting on social issues that were going on at the time, and their views were not always the mainstream, popular views. So we look at plays like Medea, for example, where a woman abandoned by her husband in a foreign land takes out her revenge on the unfair society that's reduced her to powerlessness and murders her children, like you might, But the audience would have known that story, and they would have been used to Medea being depicted as the villain. But Euripides, the playwright, takes great pains to encourage the audience to sympathize with her. So he's basically, in telling her story, he's showing all the ways that women in Greek society, which was very patriarchal, even if they were powerful, even if they had magical powers and a very high rank in society, might be reduced to a powerless state by the capricious decisions of one man. And by the time you get to the point where she does murder her kids, you're kind of on her side, which is a really kind of heroic, act of heavy lifting, I guess you could say, on the storyteller's part. And that's not the only example. There's also the play, The Trojan Women. I mean, we could talk about lots of different plays, but these are just two of our favorites. This is an epic story about the aftermath of war and its human cost. And the play shows what happens to the women and children of a city after it's been sacked. And this would have been really, really relevant at the time it was written, because it was written in direct response to something that had just occurred in Greek history when Greek armies besieged and captured the city of Milos in 415 BC. So the brutality of this particular siege shocked the Greek world, and the Greek world was very warlike at this time, so if it shocked them, it was really, really, really bad. Evidence suggests that the people of Milos suffered horrific starvation in the course of their siege, and in the aftermath, the Athenians executed all the surviving adult men who lived in Milos. They besieged and then broke the siege and captured the town, executed all the surviving men, and sold all the women and children that they found into slavery. And The Trojan Women is a play written for Athenians, written for the people in the audience would have been the people who did these things to the people of Milos. And it calls out atrocities committed by ordinary Athenian men, soldiers who would have been sitting in the audience next to their wives at this time. And it would have made, and these wives wouldn't necessarily have known, like the husbands may not have told their wives that they had done all these atrocities in Milos. So this would have been, made for some very uncomfortable dinner table conversation, I'm assuming. So the great city Dionysia was a time when playwrights and actors had a chance to speak truth to power and speak out about atrocities that were committed in their own society.
So Dionysus was traditionally a woman-led religion. The earliest evidence we have of Dionysus being worshipped on Crete strongly associates women with this religion, women as his priestesses. And you can see here, this is if you go to Crete, if you've been to Crete, I'm sure you've seen this statue. It's a Minoan woman. She's handling 2 snakes. She's got her boobs out, as you do. And, it is believed that she was an early snake goddess, priestess of Dionysus, or maybe even Dionysus's own consort, Ariadne.
Yeah, snakes were also very much associated with Dionysus. So women play a big role in Dionysian mythology too. Dionysian myths are full of maenads, or wild women who went into the woods, let their hair down, and went mad worshiping Dionysus. In mythology about Dionysus, women were powerful and they were a destabilizing factor as well. Over and over, we see stories of maenads losing themselves in divine madness and ripping men limb from limb, usually because they did not agree to worship Dionysus. And women who chose to follow Dionysus in his mythology left hearth and home, threw off the shackles of their station, and accepted a role outside of the patriarchy. And when the worship of Dionysus made its way to ancient Rome, it was still very much in reality a woman-led religion.
So in Rome, Dionysus was called Bacchus by the Romans, but immigrants and people from Greece and other areas probably still referred to him as Dionysus. The Bacchic mysteries were what the Romans called the worship of Dionysus. And as the sacred rites took root in Roman culture, shit took kind of a dark turn. Women led this cult, and once a year, they would do as the maenads did, snuck off into the woods, carrying torches to commune with the god through an intoxicating mix of wine, dancing, cymbals, clashing noises, probably some recreational drugs, and we're definitely going with the orgy theory. Yeah. So at first, only women could be in the Bacchic rites. But as time went on, men were allowed in as well, but only those younger than 18. There were older men who were in the cult. Presumably they were kind of grandfathered in. They'd already been inducted when they were a young man. Some sources say that only younger men were allowed in because that's when they were the most attractive and pliable. And remember, this was a fertility cult where orgies were part of the rituals.
So here's a fun quote that we have found. This is half of the quote, so we're going to credit it in the next slide. So men, as if seized by fits of madness and under great convulsions, gave oracles, and matrons, dressed as Bacchae, with disheveled hair and burning torches in their hands, ran down to the Tiber and plunged their torches into the water. The torches, however, containing sulfur and chalk, were not extinguished. And we're going to tell you some things about the real-life worship of Dionysus in upcoming slides that we get from Roman sources, and some of this, most of it is either from Livy or paraphrased from Livy, who's quoting some evidence that came out at these trials, which we're going to talk about. Some of it's demonizing or maybe demonizing, so we're not exactly sure how accurate this is, but it is, number one, paints such a great, vivid picture. Number two is very illuminating, and number three, it's what we've got, so we're going to read it.
Yeah.
But just read everything with a grain of salt is all we're saying.
Yeah. So the second half of the quote is, men who refused to take part in the crimes of these orgies were frequently thrown into dark caverns and dispatched, while the perpetrators declared that they had been carried off by the gods. That's one way to get rid of your detractors. And this quote came from a Dictionary of Greek and Roman Antiquities, John Murray.
So you have a picture here. There's a lot of, a little bit of problematic stuff going on with these lenses, but you do have a picture of older women leading, influencing, and indoctrinating younger men. Women were the ones who would perform the rites and acted as priestesses, and they could choose who they had sex with. Very important destabilizing thing in this patriarchal culture. Dionysus himself was gender fluid, which again threatened the patriarchy because they were very big on gender roles. And another factor to mention here is that people of all social classes took part in the Bacchic rites. A senator's son might worship alongside a tradesman or even an enslaved person, with a woman officiating. Women were in charge, and all this was very threatening to the Roman status quo. Older senators...
Yeah, and I also think women, people of all sexual identities took part in this. So it wasn't, everyone got to enjoy themselves and to be free during these events.
Yeah, and that was threatening to the Roman aristocracy for lots of different reasons. Older senators were not allowed to participate in these rites. They viewed them with suspicion. There's this quote here about how the initiated, according to Livy, did not only indulge in feasting and drinking. There's all these, unnatural vices that the bacchantes, the ritual performers, were doing, according to the senators. That wasn't the only thing that they were doing, though. They were also plotting. I love this part. They were not just, indulging in all these like licentious orgies and stuff. They were also plotting false witnesses, forgeries, false wills, and denunciations proceeding from this focus of crime. Poison and assassinations were carried out under the cover of the society, and the voices of those who'd been fraudulently drawn into these orgies would cry out against the shameless practices, but they would be drowned out by the shouts of the bacchantes and the deafening sounds of drums and cymbals. So this is extremely illuminating. In addition, like I said, to illicit perversions and murder, the senators believed that the Bacchic worshippers were plotting will forgings and assassinations. What they were worried about, this is what they were really worried about here, that the lower classes and older women that their sons were mixing with were somehow influencing these young, impressionable sons to secretly change their father's wills and then maybe assassinate them so that they can inherit. And that just shows you that what the senators were really afraid of was redistribution of wealth. So these Bacchic rites allowed all initiated people, enslaved people, free men, women, a place to worship, to drink, to plot and plan, to overthrow the patriarchy and the ruling classes. These late night orgies were about more than sex, wine, and partying. People met in secret, and under the cover of clashing music and cymbals and singing, they plotted their way into power.
So meet Pecula Ania.
So shall we say?
Exactly. So again, as we said earlier, this is what the Roman patriarchs thought that all of these worshippers were doing. Yes. And it's highly likely, as we mentioned before, that they assumed the worst because they themselves weren't allowed to participate in these rites. But things came to a head when a woman named Pecula Ania came into power. She was the head priestess of Dionysus and had great influence over how everyone worshipped. Maybe she was something like a pope, we're not sure, but she had an enormous influence on how Dionysus was worshipped in Italy. Anyway, Pecula Ania decreed that instead of these bacchanals taking place 3 days once a year, they should be performed 5 times a month, and they shouldn't be performed during the daytime. That's just a waste of torch and sulfur and chalk. Let's have them at night. So now the Bacchanalian rituals happen much more often and were much more visible in society. And some sources suggest that this is when they took a darker and more violent turn. This could also be the upper classes who were getting the history from demonizing them. So important to point out.
Grain of salt everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, around 186 BC, the Senate got together and banned the worship of Bacchus or Dionysus completely.
So when the Romans banned the worship of Bacchus or Dionysus, they rounded up all the priests, priestesses, and initiates of the Bacchic mysteries for trial, and no one was allowed to leave Italy. Many people committed suicide to avoid being caught up in the purge, and over 7,000 people were put on trial. Rome was almost deserted during the 30 days that this occurred in. Even the most innocent were worried about getting caught up in these arrests. People were punished according to how guilty they were. Some were imprisoned, some were put to death. Women involved in the worship of Dionysus were sometimes released to their families to be punished in privacy, and that probably would not have gone well. The Senate ordered the destruction and complete cessation of all Bacchanalia rituals in Rome and all throughout the Italian peninsula. The only exception was they did not want really ancient statues and altars destroyed, because they still did believe that Dionysus was a god, and they did not want to get smote. So they didn't want to piss him off too much, basically.
Exactly. That ritual madness was not something they wanted to experience.
No, you don't want to mess with the ritual madness.
Exactly. So after this, no Bacchanalia were allowed in Rome except under very strict circumstances. These restrictions included, number one, no public fund for Dionysian festivals. And it's difficult to imagine this, but essentially there was a public fund to throw big parties for different feast days. Like the biggest one would be Saturnalia, and Saturnalia actually, the god Saturn had his own olive oil budget. It's fascinating. We did a whole episode on it. You can hear more about it. But what the Roman Senate was saying is there will never be a budget for Dionysus. Number two, priests and priestesses of Bacchus and Dionysus were outlawed. Number three, if you wanted to hold a Bacchic rite, and these were important for fertility, not just of like people, but for your land.
A lot of farmers would have wanted to hold Bacchic rites.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you
wine
wanted
growers
to,
in particular.
Pardon?
So grape growers, like people
Exactly.
growing grapes for wine is what I'm trying. I know viniculturists. This would have been good for that. Yeah.
Exactly. But so if you wanted to have one of these rites, you had to ask a praetor, who would then consult a senate assembled of no fewer than 100 people. So that's quite a lot of work to get permission to throw this rite.
Then
while
so
you were
throwing rich, that was the underlying rule.
Exactly. And then when you were throwing this rite, you couldn't have more than 5 people at your celebration, and you definitely couldn't have a priest to officiate it. So Dionysus was dangerous to the Roman status quo and the Roman patriarchy itself because his religion allowed the mixing of the classes. It gave women power and influence over men, and it encouraged things the Roman Republic saw as destabilizing: sexual license, redistribution of wealth, and gender fluidity.
So the Romans couldn't erase Dionysus, so they sanitized him. They merged him with Liber Pater, who was an older god of wine, and created the Liberalia Festival, which was celebrated on the 17th of March, around the same time as the city Dionysia in Athens. This was a more innocent festival. Priests and priestesses would wear ivy garlands, which were associated with Dionysus, and they would carry things associated with Dionysus like wine and honey, and also cakes and meats to an altar to be burnt for the worship of Liber. Boys who turned 16 were given their toga virilis, which was, this is the point where they were considered men, able to be in control of their own households, and women. And this put them ritually out of the reach of influential older women who might seek to subvert them and gain power over them in the Bacchic rites. But it would take more than a Roman decree and a purge of 7,000 people to kill Dionysus. While the worship of Bacchus was kept under lock and key out in the country, among the farms and the colonies, the rites and rituals of Dionysus continued in secret underground. The common folk, women, enslaved, immigrants continued their worship.
Dionysus continued to be worshipped in secret, especially amongst the enslaved. He continued to be the patron god for those who rebelled against Rome. For instance, as we mentioned earlier, Salvius, who was the ringleader of the Second Skribal War, was a worshiper of Dionysus, and he played a flute during underground Dionysian rituals in Sicily, which I just love that fact. He was a flute monster. Spartacus's consort was the Thracian lady, and she was a priestess of Dionysus who was enslaved with him, and she built up his legend using Dionysian imagery such as snakes, and she was able allegedly to get visions from Dionysus to help their cause. Mithridates, the ruler of Pontus and an intractable enemy of Rome, took his full name, Mithridates Eupator Dionysus, and associated himself with the god. He even had coins of himself minted as Dionysus. And Mark Antony, everyone's favorite party boy and sometimes general, when he went to war against Octavian in Rome, was referred to as the new Dionysus. He often dressed as Dionysus in public, officiated at rituals as Dionysus, and encouraged the people to worship him as the new Dionysus.
So that is the story of Dionysus, god of revolutionaries. And I think we've gone way over time. Jen, I cannot see your face. Where did you go?
I'm here, but it's gotten dark, so I'm going to leave the full screen and I'm going to turn the light on.
Okay. We went way over time. Well, we still got 10 minutes for questions, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you have plenty of time.
Cool. So how do we do the questions? Should we
Okay, so kind of near the bottom right of the screen, there's an ask a question button.
Yes.
So people can click that and ask their questions, and then that's where you can also see where the questions are, of course.
So we've got a question from John Pascal. It says, will you all move on to the Near East at some point? I know you've indicated it'll eventually happen, but it just seems like Greece and Rome have enough material. You could easily end up making the podcast about them if you wanted to, which would be a damn shame for many reasons. Oh, we completely
we've been over this a lot, actually.
We actually have, we have an exit plan for how we plan to leave Greece and Rome. It's a couple of seasons away because there's still a few things we don't want to miss. But I will give you a spoiler. When we get to a season all about natural disasters, that will be the turning point where we start to leave Greece and Rome.
Yeah, we definitely want to. We did not plan to just be in Greece and Rome all the time. It kind of just happened when we started this podcast. We didn't know what kind of storytellers we were going to wind up being. And it turns out that we just fall down giant rabbit holes and follow threads. And we've been in this one for a while, but it is definitely not the only one we want to be in. So it's just going to be all of our, we'll probably be spending years in every place that we turn to.
Yeah, and because we're storytellers and not historians, it does take us a while to embed into the culture to be able to tell you the stories the way that we want to tell them to you, which is with as much insight and as much dedication to giving you a good thread and a good story while also being historically as accurate as possible.
Yeah, we didn't have we don't have background knowledge in this stuff that we got. We both took classes in school, but we did not major in this. We don't have PhDs, so it takes time to really get into culture and the history of things to be able to talk about it with knowledge. And we both knew about Greece and Rome already because we're both writing books in that area. So we'd done some background research and it seemed like an easy place to start. So that's why we wound up being here first. And it's been 2 years and we're still here. And I think that's just how it's working out.
Don't worry, we have an exit plan. We know where we want to go next.
It's only going to be another 2 years. Don't worry.
Sorry about that, but we are leaving. We are.
Yeah, we will. I promise. At some point, we're going to get the heck out.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Are there other questions? I don't see any right now. I guess that's it.
Let's see. I can see this chat. I don't see any other questions.
I guess we're done, unless someone wants to ask a question really quickly that we did not answer in this presentation.
Oh, hang on. We now got some.
Oh, we've got some.
Was there a Greek god associated with beer?
Oh, that's a super good question. I don't know, Jen. Do you know?
I don't know. I know that Dionysus is associated with mead because Dionysus was associated with bees and the sort of the domestication of bees. There was this entire ceremony called the waking of the bees that had to do with Dionysus in the sort of Dionysian mysteries. One of the things we don't have time to cover is there's a lot about Dionysus that we had to simplify for both this presentation and the podcast, but there's an entire worship of him that's also linked into the Elysian mysteries where he descends into the underworld and the seasons die and wake up around it. A lot of this then gets into a lot of price mythology. So I'm not sure, but I would say the closest thing I can think of to beer is mead, and Dionysus is definitely associated with mead.
I don't think they're very similar though. They're not really.
No.
The way that we make them is kind of similar, maybe. I've made both beer and mead. It involves a lot of fermenting of things, but that's just alcohol, so I don't know.
Yeah, I made wine when I was a kid. It is my dream to make wine again one day.
Yeah.
So the other question we had is, how do you think Rome's treatment of the Bacchids compares to other foreign cults like Isis?
Ooh, now we can bring Cleopatra into it, right, Jen?
We can bring our girl in. We had our boy Mark Antony. Let's get Cleo in.
Talk about Cleopatra. So how did the Romans see foreign cults such as Isis, for example?
Well, I mean, the thing about the Roman religion, which you see later on in Christianity, is like they kind of wanted to take the things that worked from other religions and assimilate them into their empire. So Isis, a lot of times, she gets sort of brought into like worship of people like Aphrodite, and
she's associated with Venus in the ancient Roman pantheon. Really, and
yeah.
we see a lot of that in like the Cleopatra imagery and like the way that she's like treated there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
I don't know enough about what happened with the worship of Isis in Rome to give you a qualified answer, but I suspect that when the Romans saw something like Dionysus and they didn't like it, they really sanitized it. So eventually Isis, who was also brought to Rome through, many other cultures, because she was hugely worshipped throughout, the Mediterranean and the Far East and the East. I mean, all over, really. The aspects of her that they thought were palpable, and they could use for their own purposes, they kept, and what they didn't, they probably banned.
Mm-hmm. Did any revolts in the Republic or the Empire explicitly invoke him as a guide and icon? Well, we talked about that, right? Like,
so Mithridates of Pontus fought, I think it was 3 or 4 Mithridatic wars, where he he really kicked Rome's butt quite a lot. He took Dionysus as his patron god. All of his imagery was based in Dionysus. He had coins minted of himself as Dionysus. I actually have a coin of him as Dionysus, and I adore it. As we mentioned,
coins were hardcore propaganda. I mean, this is how figures in the ancient world really like kind of spread their image around. So if he wanted to associate himself with Dionysus, that was a really strong message, and it was a really strong message, I think, particularly to enslaved people in ancient Rome. Like, I think he was really talking to them, because we're doing something else. And Genn, you came across this fact about Mithridates having a policy of wanting to attract freed slaves or runaway slaves to his movement.
He did, and I think the thing about Mithridates is also he was very close to Thrace, which is where Spartacus, someone else who took Dionysus as their patron god, was located. And because they were constantly at war with Rome, Mithridates really wanted to bring in the people who didn't like Rome and put them all under one banner. That worked, and that was Dionysus, because Dionysus was so widely known throughout the Republic and throughout the world. He was known in India, he was known in Northern Africa, everywhere, that it was an easy banner to get behind. And I want to just jump to the next question, because I think, Jenny, you're going to love this. Okay. It seems like a lot of sexual danger of Dionysus has to do with older women sleeping with younger men, and maybe each other. Was Dionysus associated with men sleeping with each other, or was that a separate association?
I don't know, Genn. Is there anything in the mythology about Dionysus having affairs with other men?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell me more about that, because I'm really interested.
I mean, Dionysus had no problem having affairs with whoever he wanted to have an affair with. I think the thing about it, like, I'm really happy
what I know about with him is the gender fluidity and all the instances where he is disguised as a woman, or he causes other people to disguise themselves as women. He
had male and female lovers. He had no problem with any of that, and I'm really happy we're able to talk about this on Pride, because I feel like Dionysus is one of the Greek gods that I'm like, thank you for being fairly decent. He's got some problematic issues, but he's pretty decent. I mean, ritual madness, not.
Well, but yeah, the bar is low with the pantheon.
So low. But I do think that, yes, the Romans were incredibly worried about women sleeping with each other, men sleeping with each other in a way that wasn't condoned by their society, because their views of sexuality were different than we have now, but they would not have, especially, I don't know. They would have had.
The Greeks and the Romans were so worried about losing control over the women. They think that's the thing. And there's this thread that runs under all the stories about Dionysus that's all about women going wild, I suppose you could say. But I think subverting gender roles is a really big part of that. Men wearing women's clothes and men taking on feminine aspects. And I mean, the way that the ancient Greeks and Romans viewed, sex between men was not the way, like, it's not the way that we would necessarily say we would view that like now. Like, sometimes it was celebrated in ancient Greece, especially, and sometimes in Rome it was not necessarily taboo, except for like depending on who is topping who, I suppose. Like, it was along different lines than now, but less complicated. But I would say that the thing about Dionysus that is really subversive in that area is the subversion of gender roles in general. And absolutely, he did take male and female lovers. I wouldn't say that sleeping with men would be the most subversive thing about him to a Roman audience, though. Right?
No, I don't think that would be to a Roman audience.
I think it would be more the gender fluidity.
Yeah, and I think that, Myths Baby, who has a podcast called Let's Talk About Myths Baby, talked about it in her last episode. Like, there are a lot of myths about sort of this gender fluidity of men dressing as women, as men taking on women's roles, because at some point in the past, that was something that they did. And there's a real fear with losing, especially in these patriarchal cultures, with not being able to understand why people would do these things, and also losing that patriarchal ability to control. So I feel like Dionysus is so destabilizing because he wants you to just come as you are. And when you worshipped him, he put on a leopard skin, you put on like a flowy outfit, you got your thyrsus, which was essentially a penis stick, and you just went wild. So I think that's more of the fear that the Romans had.
I think we're just about out of time.
Yeah.
I have to move on to the next one. So
yeah. Thank you
everyone.
For everyone asking wonderful questions, and thank you for having us. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks.